Hi, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the I Owe It to Myself podcast. I am coming to you today with the second episode in the read-along series for the House of Flame and Shadow, and today we're going to be talking about chapters 20 through 42. This is going to be my introduction for this episode. I know for the past few, I have been doing real-time introductions as I am editing, but I have a short window of time and I have a lot to say, so we're just going to go ahead and dive in. When I tell you that there is so much that has happened in these chapters, it's insane. And for anybody who reads SJM, I know that you know what I mean. It isn't just that she's packing a lot into these pages, it's that I am so invested in these characters that because every single one of them is going through some type of trial or tribulation, it is overwhelming, but in the best way. Like I said, I am just so invested in them that I want to just see them get to safety and get victory and get vengeance and all the things. And there's just so much going on, bouncing between all of the different viewpoints that we're getting in these stories. It is a lot. And to start off my day having read these chapters and get to the point to record, it's a heck of a way to start a day, but that is where we are. And so let me go ahead and try to share where I'm at and collect my thoughts of how I'm feeling about everything. When we left off at the end of the first episode for this read-along series, we were with Bryce when she was with the characters from ACOTAR, Azriel, and Nesta, and they were learning even more about the history of their people. I commented on this in the first episode, but in this history, I just want to summarize quickly that essentially what Bryce is learning is that even the people that she had inherited her power from through all of the years and generations and all of that were really power hungry. And essentially the theme that we're taking away from that first whole section of the book is that when you are given undeniable power, it is hard for that not to go to your head, and it's hard not to be led by domination and wanting to control. And I think that's one of the main things that differentiates Bryce from them, is because thus far we haven't seen her wanting that. She is so against everything that these people have done, the way that they have treated the people that they're supposed to be ruling over and caring for, and how they have handled things in the past, that it is almost like, I don't want to say typical, I don't think that's the right word, but I think for SJM, it's a very fitting arc for her character to have in terms of character development, because she being so against the decisions that they made and how that they've ruled and wanting to be a fair and true queen in any way that she can, it feels very appropriate. It feels very SJM-esque in the way that she writes and she approaches her female main characters. And I don't say that in a bad way. I just say that to recognize that there are themes across the books of what it is that she wants these females to do and the part that she wants them to play as they step into their power and as they rule. And I'm not tired of that. I'm not sick of that. I don't want anything different for Bryce. I think the way that she goes about it and her personality is enough to differentiate her from the past queens that we've seen in SJM's books. And I think that the way that her court is coming together is a little bit nuanced and different too, that while that blueprint has kind of been the blueprint, it seems, at least in Throne of Glass, it was very much like that. To see that again here and to see that merging with the ACOTAR characters, I'm okay with that formula and I'm enjoying it. But I say all of that to say that, and I mentioned this in the first recording, which is that anger is fueling Bryce. She is so pissed and betrayed and angry that not only has she been lied to, and everyone she knows has been lied to about the history of their people, but that it's all just been an ego trip for the rulers that have been in their lives and for the Asteri and the way that they've treated people and the planets that they conquer. And she's just over it. And so what we see rather quickly as we start to get into this section of the book is that her and Nesta and Azriel come across this section of the prison below them where there is somebody who is housed who seems to be another Asteri-like person from way back in the day who was captured there. And while she was telling the story of how she got there, while at the time it was to keep her contained so that this particular individual couldn't do any more damage, she's also talking about how there was a lot of power and ego that was coming from the people who had trapped her there. And in the end, Bryce and Nesta end up killing this person. And it's a very interesting scene because we have seen the ACOTAR characters go to war with Hybern and, all of these characters that have just what seems to be endless power and come out the other side, not unscathed, but come out the other side. And in this small room with this very powerful individual, they, go head to head with this person. And it's a little bit odd for me to know that people as powerful as Nesta and Azriel, that Bryce shares space with them. And I understand the symbolism of it. I understand that SJM is probably trying to do exactly that. She's trying to put Bryce on this same playing field as them and to really exemplify the power that she has. Also, by this point, we have to remember that she's taken some of that power. The whole reason why they got to this place of being in this room is because Bryce said she can feel the power, and she ended up kind of pulling some from that. So she is now forever unchanged because of that action. And in the moment of going through this tussle and defeating this person, she ultimately ends up leaving. What I do hope as I continue to get through this book is that she leaves on good terms with the ACOTAR characters. I've mentioned this before of how that may not end up being the case. I believe that it will be. I think it could be still a little bit more rocky to get there. But by the end of where we are now for this section of the book, by the time you get through chapter 42, I don't get the sense that she's necessarily going to have any more engagement with them. And I do worry a little bit about that because I don't think that the impression that she left is going to have been that great. What I will say is one of the bonus chapters was a chapter about her and Nesta and Azriel and them walking through the tunnels and everything before they get to this point in the prison and listening to music and her trying to explain to them and connect with them. And I think that moments like that are showing that they see her for her being cut of the same cloth as them in wanting to, love her family and take care of her people and enjoy life and just be, even though she kind of has this burden of being this powerful person, but they also don't know her and they're very hesitant because of the power that they sense in her and that they've seen her display. And so I understand if she wouldn't have left the best taste in their mouth by the time that she left and the way in which she left, where she just cut open this portal and dipped out. But I say all of that to say that I hope that we at least get another snippet of something where it lets me know how they feel in terms of their relationship with her, that there's a little bit more understanding of, is it still suspicious? Is it positive though? Is it bad? I just don't feel like I really get that. I feel like if I was them sitting in this prison and she just cut open this like rift and left, that I would be like very hesitant and very much annoyed and like, I don't know what to do with this person. And now I'm terrified that she's just going to come back and they're almost waiting for bated breath that it's going to happen. I just hope we get a peek into that. I wanted to comment on that straight out the gates because as of right now, for the rest of the chapters that I've read, they don't come up again. So I wanted to kind of put that thought out there and put that to the side. We then see Bryce immediately land in her father's home. And I want to go through this rather quickly, but this back and forth between them, there was a moment where I was wondering if there was going to be some kind of understanding and kinship that came out. And there was a moment there in some of the interactions where it seemed like it was. And I didn't know if it was because Bryce was so desperate of everything that was going on that she just was wanting to get the help that she could get, but she also wanted to get back to her friends. And she was just feeling, all the things, scared and exhausted and unsure, et cetera, et cetera. Or if the king was starting to see her for the powerful person that she is and was kind of warming up to that. I don't know, because it's so cold and warm with them. There was moments like that where you started to question and be like, what is happening here? Are we actually getting a little bit of like a mutual respect for each other? Like genuinely, not just respect for the power. And then there's moments where they just go back to being assholes to each other. And I couldn't really read the room. What I will say though is that Bryce was very smart about like, you give me info, I give you info, right? She played that game that he wanted to play, but she definitely was like, this is going to be as even as I can try to have it be. And what ultimately ends up happening is that she outsmarts him. What we come to find out is that Rune had the key in his room for the cuffs that she was wearing. She got them off. She ends up cuffing him and locking him in the basement before she leaves. What I love about that so much is that I never saw it coming. And if you've listened to episodes of me before, I mentioned things in regard to SJM about that. And I'm sure it will definitely come up when I do my ACOTAR reread, which is just to say that there are always moments where I feel like I'm pretty tied in with her, or I know her writing. And then there's stuff like that where it's just like, you just don't see it coming. I never questioned why Bryce landed there. I figured that just if she was still getting used to her powers and teleporting and this rift situation, I figured that to some degree, her power and his power was kind of connected. She was never going to be able to go to the prison because it would have just been a death trap. And everybody that she loved was pretty much there. She didn't really have a reason to go to Ethan or to Tharian, but she had no idea where they were anyway, or like what was happening with them. So it kind of just made sense to me that there could be a lot of reasons as to why she landed in her dad's house. And honestly, as much of a dick as he is, it was a safe place for her to go to some degree. But to come to find out that he even realizes, like, you did this on purpose, you came here on purpose, and that she played him, that she knew that he had information and research, and that she wanted to go pick his brain, and she was going to play this game with him, and she knew that the key was there in the room, so if all things, went sideways, she could get the cuffs off, which it did, and she was able to find the key. It just all plays so nicely back into the fact that these characters are always 10 steps ahead, and they're thinking about things that we never would have, right? And there were Easter eggs, I'm sure, in the past conversations with Rune and Bryce about that key that now come back into play that I didn't remember, I didn't recall. It's just all of those kinds of things where it's like the information's there, but you're not always fully paying attention to it, but it matters for these characters. And so when it smacks you in the face and it all comes together like this, you cannot help but get this big ass grin on your face. Like, I had full body chills when I realized what she was doing. And when I was reading that part of the book and she locked him up, I was like, oh, she's gonna go kick some serious ass. What I love about all of that is that in the end, she was sitting there looking at what her dad was working on, and she was thinking, can I potentially charge myself up with this little contraption and this, starlight he's looking at and whatever, and ultimately it ends up working. In this, she realizes that her power is different. She knows that it is because of the power that she got from being with the ACOTAR characters. But she can see it. She can see it in its form when she's using this like prism thing. And she comments on how the dark and the light are together and how it's not that she is seeing that her power is fully dark now, but she sees the elements of the darkness mixed in with her starlight. And there's a part of it almost where I don't know if she's fully understanding or has fully grasped it. What I take from it is that she's kind of processing the fact that, like, I'm not afraid of that. I need to be aware of what it is, and I need to understand that there's darkness here, and I need to have respect for what it is that I've taken or what has now been imbued in me even further. But I need to use the dark and the light together. There is strength in both of those things coming together, and I have that in me already. And whatever happens going forward, like, the dark and the light can work in my favor. And this is a small sampling of that. And so I think that that is important, and I wouldn't be surprised if that comes up later as well. All that to say, when that goes down, she then says, her thought process is, I'm going home, and Hunt is her home, and that she's going to go to them. Now, separately from Bryce, we have a lot that has happened with all of the other characters. And before I get into the whole situation with Hunt and Baxian and Rune and the Hind, I want to talk about Ethan and Tharian for a second. What we know Ethan to be doing is that he's gone to Jessica to ask for help. And she makes it very clear that what he's asking for is very unusual, and him to even be there is very unusual and all of this stuff. But he is very adamant about how he feels like he messed up and he needs help, and he needs a necromancer to bring back the Fender heir that he killed when he was fighting during the whole situation with the Viper Queen. And what we know about Ethan at this point is that he is so deeply feeling the actions of what he did. I think that he feels like she was the only one that could have ever challenged Sabine, and so now that she's dead, he's done something irreversible, except for the fact that there is this option to work with the necromancer. What we know about this, though, is that it's never good. People don't come back as they were before. It's just a process that is never really a good idea. And in the moment, Jessica is like, I'll help you if you are my assistant. And so in these chapters of this section that I've read, we find Ethan very much in the throes of this. He's, fighting with books and talking to Jessica and all this stuff. And she's commenting on how much he eats. And they seem to be finding a rapport with one another. Although in this set of chapters, there isn't much more beyond that there isn't anything beyond what I just recapped that we've seen of what is going to happen with Ethan. I have this feeling that Jessica isn't going to actually help him with the necromancer. I have a feeling that she is going to trick him a little bit because she is going to have seen how much he was drowning and what he was feeling and where his head was at, and instead say, like, I'll help you if you help me. And she's just going to let him get lost in the work while saying, I'm working on it. And because of her power and how she commands the room, he's not going to probably press for a while. And there's going to come a point where she's going to say, like, I was never going to do that for you. And I don't say that because I think that Jessica is just trying to use Ethan for him to be her new assistant. I say that because, again, I think she really understands that it's not going to go the way that he thinks that it is. I don't know if Jessica knows everything that has exactly happened with his whole situation. I'm sure that, she does, especially given what he's asked her to help him with. And so if we think about it in that context, she's going to be smart enough to know that if Ethan really wanted to challenge Sabine, he could. That, she will have somehow found a way to know that the current prime said that Ethan could be alpha and said that he would make him alpha. Like, she will know all of that. It's just so fitting for a character like Jessica to know all of that without having been in those conversations or anybody even telling her. Like, she'll figure it out. And so again, I think that there's a part of me where she's going to end up being like, I was never going to do this for you, but you don't need her. Like, I understand the struggle here, but you are the only new alpha that you've ever needed. And I hope that then pivots Ethan to be in this place where he is going to challenge Sabine. The other side of that is if it actually comes true and they use a necromancer, I think it's just going to go poorly. I just don't see a way in which it's going to work in his favor. Even if it works and she comes back, again, because we know that nobody is ever the same as they were before. It's not like Ethan and the Fender heir had a strong relationship or anything yet, but he was working on it. However, I think because it's not as if it was like bringing Danica back per se. And so because they didn't have this strong bond with each other or history together, and she had spent so much time, just being in that freaking capsule or whatever the heck it was that Ethan had saved her from, the version of her that we would get if she was to be brought back, I don't feel confident that it would be positive. I almost feel like it would be way worse than what it was before. And there's a potential she's just going to have to be killed again. And I think that would be even worse for Ethan and his psyche and like where his head is at. And so it is obviously possible that could all happen and we could see what happens. It's also possible that she comes back and she ends up being good and they figure it out and like it's all hunky-dory. But I don't know. There was just something about seeing how much Ethan and Jessica were talking. And she even was like, you're asking a lot of questions and kind of overstepping. But yet she was engaging him to some degree in this conversation that makes me feel like she knows what he's trying to do. And even though she is not known for being this super nice person, she has pretty much always shown up for those who show up for her. And I have a feeling that she would help Ethan for the sake of what her relationship with Bryce is like, and even just if she ever thought that it would do her any good to help him. And that's, again, another reason why I don't think she's going to actually follow through on the necromancer of it all. But one thing that was interesting during this conversation with him and Jessica is that she talks about her power, and I don't know or recall that we've ever been given that information before. But she basically says, like, long ago when the Asteria were doing their thing and what have you, I was touched by one of them and he did not mean to, but because he had so much power, I inadvertently had gotten some. And I have spent my time over the years honing it and working on it, that there is a lot of really powerful things that I can do. And I am presently cursed to always be in the form and like look the way that I do, which is as a young woman, because of these things that had happened in the past. Ethan's asking of her, like, can she break it or can she do anything about it? Or like, why doesn't she use all this power or whatever the case is? And she basically says something like, one day my form will change, but it's not time yet. And I go back to thinking about how Jessica had met up with one of the prince demons of hell, and they had kind of alluded and had this conversation in the graveyard about their plan and like things going according to how they wanted them to. And I feel like when it comes to a head with the Asteri, that Jessica is going to play a really big part and that she's not going to make it out of this book alive. But I think it's going to be what she wants. I think that she is going to be somebody who absolutely kicks ass and takes names and plays a very pivotal part in bringing the Asteri down. And I think that she, in the back of her mind, knows people like Bryce and now potentially Ethan can be people that she can trust, and that will take care of the things that she has spent her life trying to protect and guard, and that they can do that going forward. I get vibes almost like, I'm totally blanking on her name, but I'm getting vibes from ACOTAR of, it's not Mor. I'm totally blanking on her name, but I'm getting vibes from one of the characters in ACOTAR who is just this ancient being. And basically it's like, if she was to unleash everything that she is, it would be like the end of days. And that is the vibe that I get from Jessica, that she's willing to do what she has to do only when it is time for her to do it. And she doesn't come across as being super, super ancient all the time in the way that she talks, but I have always noticed that she does seem sophisticated. There is something about her where it's like, it's a little bit there. It's why I've mentioned in the past of how like Hunt seems so young, but he's hundreds of years old, but yet in the whole spectrum of like how old he could be in theory if he just was able to live his life and was never threatened or whatever, he is young for that, but he just feels like you're almost reading about like a 30-year-old character. Jessica doesn't feel that way, but she doesn't feel super, super ancient to me. But I say all of this to say, and I'm not meaning to tangent, that I think she's going to rain down hell when she needs to. And I'm really excited to see what that looks like, because she's one that you don't always know if she's in your corner. You don't always know where she stands. But I think that while there is a part of her that will only look out for herself and do what she needs to do, there's a larger part of her that knows that there are things that need to be handled, and she's willing to like play her part in that. And it's going to be in favor of people like Bryce and her friends in this court that she's creating and the people that she wants to protect. The last part of this episode that I now want to talk about is everybody else. And so we are in the thick of Rune and Baxian and Hunt being in the dungeons, and it is brutal. Like, when I started this section of the book, just the descriptions of their physical state and where their minds are at and the hope they're grasping onto, they are going through a level of torture that is unreal, because you have this element of them being able to either get healed with medicine or ever heal themselves if they were allowed to, you know, without the shackles on, which doesn't really happen, but like in theory, right? Because of their fayness and just the powers that they have, they can get tortured and then heal and then just be retortured again. And to me, as much as I respect the fact that they got to this place of like, we're going to cut off Rune's hand in order to try to get something to help get us out of here, because it will eventually grow back, and or we're just going to get killed anyway, so like, what does it matter, is a level of survival and mental state that I can't even comprehend. Like, I can't even put into words what that must have been like or what that compares to, because it just doesn't. It doesn't compare up against anything that I can describe, because it is such an unreal situation. And what is obviously very powerful about that and telling about that is just how brutal these angels are that are torturing them, right? You think about what the Hind has been putting up with these people all of these years. You think about the Harpy, you think about Pollux, like they revel in this and they love it and they get joy out of it, and it's disgusting. And the Asteri don't care. They're just like, yeah, go for it, right? Because all that they care about is survival. And so it's just an unreal level of torture and a state for them to be in that it was hard to read, but I was glad to be reading it because it meant that they were surviving. But one of the things that has since come through out of all of that is, because they didn't just cut Rune's hand off, Baxian had to bite it off. They now have a very interesting relationship. We haven't seen much of their interaction yet, because where I have paused for this read-along episode is that everyone is just kind of finding their footing again for the first time. And so they haven't had a lot of interaction with each other, but it has already come up a couple of different times that this happened, and you know that they're going to need time to recover from that, which is completely valid. The other thing that I want to say is that part of me wasn't necessarily surprised, but I was really devastated when they put the crown back on Hunt. And I think I might have talked about this before because it didn't necessarily happen in this set of chapters, but I'm bringing it up now because when Bryce gets back and she sees it, they have a very brief interaction where she talks about it and brings it up, right? And we're going to get more about this, I'm sure, but it is just this reminder that for every step they take forward, it feels like there's 1,000 steps that they take back. And I have no doubt that the Witch Queen will remove that crown from him again, and that will happen rather soon. I really hope that it does, because I hope that it doesn't end up that crown can get used against him when they're in this battle. And I could see that going really sideways. I could see that happening because it would add some really crazy like twists and elements to this whole situation, right? If he has to kind of abide by these rules because of this damn crown. So I don't know what's going to happen, but part of me just kind of hopes that it's as simple as like, yes, it came back, Witch Queen, take it off and let's move on, because we just already know he's been through the ringer and I don't want to see that leverage against him anymore. They're going to have to go through enough. I just want it to be done. It's like the hate that we all have and the anger that we all have that it is back on his head. It's like, that's enough. We know it creates our frustration, and it's going to fuel him as just another thing to use when he's trying to kill the Asteri. Let's just get rid of it and move on. Like, I don't need a long drawn out thing for it. So I wanted to touch on it because it is a big deal that it has happened again, but I really just hope that it doesn't end up being something that works against him when the battle finally comes to actually take place. That all being said, once everybody gets saved and they're on this ship, which I am going to talk about Lydia and kind of her part in everything from even when they were back in the prison. So I know I'm jumping around, but we're now all on the ship together. Everybody has gotten saved and Bryce has found her way back. And one of the things that I appreciate is that we're moving through things rather quickly. And what I mean by that is we see Rune, who like kind of woke up and came to and realized that, you know, his hand was still gone, but that it was in the process of growing back. And immediately, like he wanted to be with Lydia. We know that Lydia was dead and had died several times from being on the ship where they saved her and brought her back, and she died again and came back and whatever. And even Hunt like shocked her with his lightning to like restart her heart. We know that Rune gave up medicine for her to be able to try to get healed. And so he's just in this place where he doesn't know what to do with himself. He is so conflicted about her, but he won't leave her side. You have Declan and Flynn that are on the boat because they came to help save the guys that were in the prison. So they're there and they're in one piece because they were obviously fine, really, to begin with, and were never tortured. You have Tharion, who's on the ship because he was all a part of it, and he helped kind of soften the blow for when Lydia fell off the rocks or jumped off the rocks, but even still, she was obviously gravely injured. And you have Hunt and you have Baxian, right? And you get this brief run throughout a couple of these chapters of everybody kind of catching up with each other and just trying to settle back in, right? You see Deck and Flynn interacting with Rune when he's in the room with Lydia and just get the understanding of what's happening there. You see Hunt having talked to Tharion of like, what do we do now and what's next? And at the time, it was in regard to we need to get an audience with the Queen of the Ocean and we need to figure out where the hell Bryce is. And then you see Hunt and Baxian have interaction where like they're trying to get back into normal life of like working out a little bit or whatever, and Baxian isn't really sharing his feelings about the whole situation, and Hunt is okay with that, but he's trying to just be like, you know, I'm here for you. Like, I don't fully understand still how we got here and how you are also on the same side as Lydia and us. And even Baxian's like, I don't think I really understand it either, but they're not really talking any more in depth about it. And then everybody kind of comes together when Bryce shows up. And there's a couple of things I want to talk about as that happens. But the one thing I want to comment on briefly before I go back in the order of the story is that when Bryce shows up, what I really appreciate is that her getting caught up to everything and her catching up them on what she learned was very fast. It wasn't belabored. It was very quick. It was like, yes, this happened. Here's what I went through. Here's what I know. And here's how we got tortured and everything that happened. And now you know. I appreciate that because there have been times I feel like in these books, but of course in many other books that I've read, where sometimes those kinds of things take a while to figure out. It's like they can never find the right time to have the conversation, or they do, but they don't share everything because trauma or whatever the case may be. And that withholding ends up becoming a pivotal part of the story or affecting what happens next. And I really don't want to deal with that. I don't want it to be belabored. And I'm so glad that SJM didn't do that. It was like, yep, here we are. Everyone's caught up. We just need to kick ass. Like, it's like you feel this turning in the book that we've been through so much that we just now need to conquer. We just have to move forward. We cannot dwell. Like, all of this just has to fuel us. We just have to move forward. So I'm really, really glad that that all happened and that we can move forward. Now, before I talk about what moving forward looks like, let's go back here briefly. We find out that Tharion doesn't really have to ask for the Queen of the Ocean to come, although he does. But it's because she's coming anyway. And she's coming because she knows that Tharion is on the ship and she knows that everybody else is as well. And so when she shows up, there is a lot of dialogue about how Baxian and Hunt and Tharion all feel about her being there and how she's like this small but mighty woman and very daunting and like scarier than the Asteri in certain ways and what have you. And they have this conversation and she basically is like, look, the Queen of the River wants you returned, Tharion, and is like threatening war against me if I don't. The Viper Queen wants you returned and is threatening war against me if I don't. Quick side note, what we are reminded of is that when they left the meat market after the fight, the sprites torched the entire place. I think I had forgotten that. Like, I thought that they just set fire as part of a diversion, but like the entire market was like affected, which is absolutely massive. And so it's not that the Viper Queen is mad that they like bailed or whatever. I mean, she said that they were all like free to go. It's that action that she's now like, oh, now you have blood on your hands and like you're affecting my money and my business. And so I'm going to kill you. And so the Ocean Queen is like, why should I spare you? Like, these people want to wage war. And why do I give a crap about going to war for you? As they're having this conversation, Bryce shows up. And it's the first time that all of the characters see her and that she sees them since she first opened a portal and jumped. And she says, I'm a queen and Tharion serves me, and that's the end of it. Like, I have claim to him and nobody else can. And this Ocean Queen is like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, who are you? And so they have a conversation where ultimately Bryce knows her place, but per usual, she's really pushing the boundaries of that. And she's basically saying like, I'm not going to make choices that the same rulers in the past did, because their ego and their desire for power drove us to be exactly where we are today. So while you're saying that a very viable option is that I open a portal and I shove as many people through as I can and we leave this world and I seal it off forever, there is a real possibility that not everyone is going to make it through. And then how do you go about deciding who gets through and all of this kind of stuff? I'm not going to play that game. I'm not going to be that person. And of course, the Ocean Queen says, well, that's what it is. You always have to sacrifice a few for the greater good of the many. And it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And that is not an option. And Hunt agrees with her and they're having this conversation. And ultimately Bryce is like, you're a coward. Like, because you won't help us fight and you won't give us the army to fight this threat that you have been fighting, but way before we ever came along. And your solution is to escape and just bail. I'm not going to do that. And so they don't actually leave on good terms. And we don't have clarity if she's honoring the fact that Tharion is a part of Bryce's court. I'm sure that we will get that soon, because I'm sure that the River Queen and the Viper Queen will come knocking on Bryce's door. And this is where people are going to start to learn about the fact that Bryce is claiming stake as a queen and like has a throne, quote unquote, and like a court of her own, quote unquote. So it makes sense that this is kind of how that all came to life and how she's asserting that authority. But what the River Queen or what the Ocean Queen says at the end of their conversation is, when you realize that I'm right and that you have to open that portal, I just hope that you will do me the honor of saving some of my people. And so even though they don't leave off on good terms, we still see this request, because what I am guessing is that this Ocean Queen acknowledges and can sense and understands how much power Bryce has. And that regardless of what Bryce does or doesn't want to do, if push comes to shove and that is the only option, she's probably the only person who could actually make it happen in terms of like opening a portal and getting everybody out. So she's not going to fully say, screw you, Bryce, and whatever, because if that does come, she wants Bryce to have her favor to some degree and save any of her people that she possibly could. And I think, again, that that's an interesting acknowledgement, because it's setting us up here for there to be this real recognition that Bryce is a queen that can't be ignored. She is now no longer just like the Autumn King's daughter that's a princess that has power or whatever. She is a queen. She is making it known that she is as such and what have you. And even The last thing I'll say about this is even when she first entered and she says all this, at some point the Ocean Queen is like, I assume that the Autumn King still lives. And Bryce is like, for now. Again, there's that moment where she's asserting this fact of like, I could really take him out if I wanted to, and I'm not here to mess around. And so you can see me however you want to see me, but I'm staking claim as a queen, and I'm going to make shit happen and defend our world and our people, and I'm going to take out the Asteri because I'm not doing this anymore, and I'm not going to repeat past mistakes. So I'm very interested to see what happens. If I had to bet, the Ocean Queen is going to come and help in some way, shape, or form in the future. There's going to be a contentious allyship there, I'm sure. And I bet that it will end up being the same with the River Queen and the Viper Queen, that when it's all said and done, that these people may not all like each other and be totally like symbiotic with one another, but they're going to lend help because Bryce is the only option that they have. Now, all of that to say, where we kind of wrap up these chapters is after all of that has happened and after Bryce has come back and they've had those quick conversations about like what happened when you jumped, what happened while you guys were tortured, and they're kind of just processing this information. While all of that was happening, Rune was in a separate part of the ship and Lydia woke up. And the minute that she realized where they were and that she had survived, she bolts out of the bed, which is already insanity because she literally was barely even alive. And what we come to very quickly find out is that she has children. She has 2 kids on the boat and they are twins. I never saw that coming at all. And so once that goes down, she passes out. And so by the time that Bryce is there, Rune ends up showing up and seeing Bryce and is like, holy crap, didn't know you were here. Yada, yada, yada conversation. And says like, hey, you know, Lydia had another secret, which is that she has children. And they're like, well, whose are they? Like, whose kids are they? Like, are they Pollux's? He's like, I don't know. They don't have wings. And like, they're having conversation about it, but it doesn't really go any farther than that. I think that everybody is going to start to come together as a full group and they're going to just get on the same page about where everything is and what's happening. And we're going to learn about who fathered these children, the role that Lydia is really, you know, playing in all of this and what her end game is and why the kids are there and all of this kind of stuff. And then they're going to start getting into planning mode because the last thing that Bryce says when we round out chapter 42 is she says, yes, we need to go ahead and start planning and figuring out how to take the Asteri down, but we have one more place to go. And she needs to go into the Mists of Avalon and she needs to get into the library. And she says that it's for research, which kind of is, kind of isn't. But she knows now because she spent time with the Autumn King and what he was saying in regard to the sword and the knife that she has, that there is more there in this library that they can't get into about how they interact with each other and kind of really ultimately what needs to happen with both of them. And so she even had asked him, like, how do I get in or how can you get me there or whatever? And if from what I remember, he didn't have much to say about it because it's like, well, you don't, right? Like they're protected for a reason. So as I round this out, what I'll say is what's funny about this is it very much reminds me of any of the storylines in ACOTAR when they started to go get the troves. It's like, before you can get to the battle, before we can do the big thing, we have to go get these other things. It feels, again, very much like this blueprint. I've used that word a couple of times in this episode and probably in others, but there is this blueprint that it seems that SJM kind of follows every now and again, where she is, you know, we're almost there. We're not quite there, but we're almost there. And we got to go put ourselves in other types of perilous situations, very complicated and dangerous in order for us to be fully prepared to go ahead and do this war. So I know that in chapters coming up, we're automatically going to see that interaction. That's one. I know that we're going to probably see more with Hypoxia, the Witch Queen, especially as it pertains to getting the crown off of Hunt, but just in terms of like allyship and whatnot. We're going to see more of Jessica and Ethan because eventually they're going to get back to land and or, you know, get Ethan back in the throes with them to try to figure out how they can have even more allies and, you know, do what they need to do with the Asteri. And probably have interaction with a bunch of other characters that, you know, have come into play in the past that I'm not thinking of right now. But we're really at a turning point. I would say that I am not quite halfway through the book yet, but I feel like we're about there in terms of the story, right? All of this hardship and all of these things that have happened and everyone being split across everywhere, while they're not fully all together yet because Ethan isn't with them, for the most part, they're together again. And now they're just trying to figure out how to recover, how to get their feet under them and what the next steps are. And even Bryce says, like, when she comes back and we're listening to her monologue, when she says that she sees Hunt and all of this stuff, it's like, there's so much I want to say to him and I just want to hug him and I don't want to let go and whatever, but we have so much to do. Like, I can't waste any time. Like, we just have to keep going, especially because the minute that anyone knows that Bryce is back, that is not on their side, the Asteria are going to find out and they're going to come after them. So it's like, she doesn't have time to waste. We don't have time to fuck around. We just have to get to it, because the sooner we get to it and get through this, then the sooner we're on the other side. Again, I feel like we are just at such a big turning point and it's really picking up steam, and I'm really excited to see how this all goes. So thank you for joining me for episode 2 for House of Flame and Shadow. As always, I want to hear all of your thoughts and theories in the comments of YouTube. What are you liking? What are you not? What are your hopes? What are your worries? Let's all talk about it. And I look forward to reading on in this book and continuing to share my thoughts. So thank you so much for being here, for following along, and until next time, friends.